So thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this webinar. Thanks to the European Association for Banking and Financial History, and thanks Carmen and Gabriella for organizing everything. I'm going to speak today about the organization I work for, Europeana, which is a cultural heritage initiative from the European Union, which is about digitization and digital transformation of cultural heritage. I'm starting with this image today, which is known as the Bank of Ireland in Dublin. I chose this kind of specifically because I am Irish, but I like that this is not from a collection that is to do with Ireland. It's actually from a collection of the Ajuntament de Girona, which is the city council, the archives of the city council of Girona in Spain. And I think it sort of symbolizes the sort of European interconnected nature of the work that Europeana does. So moving forward. So today what I hope to do is introduce you to Europeana and the work that we do. Hopefully some of you have already heard of us, but if not, I hope this will be a nice introduction. And present some examples of the work that the team that I'm in do about reuse of cultural heritage collections, particularly photography, and social, how we contribute to kind of social activities that the digital collections that we work with can bring, and hopefully inspire some new ideas and collaboration. So the big question, what is Europeana? This is a kind of a whirlwind tour of what we do, so I'm not going to cover everything, but hopefully we'll give you a good taste of the work that we do. So we are an open data platform with many different services, many different things that we do. Some are very professionally focused, some are more about engaging people who have an interest in cultural heritage. On our website, we publish more than 50 million digital objects from 3,500 plus galleries, libraries, archives, and museums all across Europe, and some even beyond Europe. We hopefully add value to their collections by bringing these together and giving more visibility, more reach to the collections than any one organization could achieve by itself. Our key digital product is a website called Europeana Collections and a suite of APIs, which are ways into the data that is in Europeana. I won't talk too much about those right now, though. So our mission is to transform the world with culture. It's quite a grand and big statement, but we believe that cultural heritage has the power to help change the world and help bring about new perspectives, new ways of thinking. We want to build on the rich heritage of Europe that has been digitized and continues to be digitized, and make it easier for people to use that, whether that's for work, research, and other activities, for learning, particularly in formal education, or just for fun and enjoyment and entertainment. So the Europeana initiative is actually made up of several different organizations or partnerships. I work for an organization based in the Netherlands called the Europeana Foundation. Our offices are in The Hague. We also have something called the Europeana Aggregator Forum, which is a group of organizations that work with us to help bring content into Europeana. I'll talk about that in a moment. And we also have a community of cultural heritage professionals all around Europe, which are called the Europeana Network. All of this is an initiative of the European Union. It was established in 2008, so we're about 12 years old now. The Europeana Foundation and a group of partners are given the remit to run the Europeana initiative. The foundation that I work for has about 60 staff. We are around 17, maybe more now actually, different nationalities, and about half gender balance. As I mentioned, we're based in The Hague, and our network association is a community of around 2,000 plus cultural heritage professionals. So our network of data partners is very large. So as I mentioned earlier, our website displays the digitized collections of around 3,500 different galleries, libraries, museums, and archives. These are cultural heritage organizations in many different countries that provide data to Europeana. We don't have a one-to-one relationship with all of those. That would be pretty impossible to do. So what we have instead is relationships with organizations called aggregators. And they are organizations that bring content together and then bring that content into Europeana. These can be based on a national level. So for example, in Germany, there's a national aggregator. In Ireland, there's a national aggregator, but also sometimes on specific topics. So we have one that's about fashion, one about Jewish heritage, and sometimes on what we call domains. So for example, we have a museum aggregator, a library aggregator, and an archive aggregator. I won't go into too much of the detail of how all this works right now because it's quite complex, and if you want to know more, I can point you to information that explains a lot more about how that all works. But there were two particular aggregators that I wanted to bring to your attention as they're relevant, I think, to your work. One is called Photo Consortium, which is a domain aggregator which specializes in photographic content, particularly the early years of photography. And we've been working with them for many years. So since 2014, they've made more than 500,000 photographs available through Europeana from around 50 different partners across Europe. And another one, which is called Archives Portal Europe. That is an aggregator for archival institutions. They have a separate website to Europeana, and then they also bring content into Europeana. They have information about 7,000 different organizations from 32 different countries. And many of those have brought content into Europeana, just under 500,000. And you can follow the links when the presentation is shared to find out a bit more about both of those. I thought I'd also give some examples. I won't talk too much about each of these right now, but you can follow the links to see more about specific archives that have shared their data in Europeana. So the National Archives of Norway have shared archival documentation as well as photography. So this photograph of a train on a bridge is from the National Archives of Norway. And they have so the level of archives that we have, it goes from national level all the way to kind of local level. So for example, Dublin City Library and Archive have shared with us a large collection of photographs, mostly photographs, I think, relating to a specific industry in Dublin. AMSAB is a Belgian organization. They're an archive and institute of social history with many, many photographic collections. And we also work on many different levels. So very specifically, Atria, which is an institute and archive on gender equality and women's history, actually based here in Amsterdam. They have shared their collection, which has some photographs, but a lot of other material, other archival material, objects and documents and many other things. And when the presentation is shared, you can take a look at all of these a bit more. The Europeana Network, as I mentioned, is a group of cultural heritage professionals who are interested in digitizing and digitization as a process. That could be from many different levels. One second, there's a police car going past the building. That could be on the technical level, on questions about metadata and working through the infrastructure that makes Europeana and sharing open data and linking open data work, but also on communicating, on research, on copyright. Within the network, there are 6 different communities, one on the technical side, one on copyright, one about research and academic research, one about education, one about communicating and engaging audiences, and one about impact and measuring the impact of all this work. An important part of the Europeana initiative over the last sort of 12 years is that we've tried to work out common policies and standards so that we can work together well. So for example, we have many different documents, some of which I'll talk about now. One is called the Europeana Publishing Framework, which outlines how organizations can share their data in Europeana in a sort of a framework way with different tiers of involvement and different ways to be involved. Whether you want Europeana to be somewhere that you can just, a way that your content and collections can be discovered, or something more where people can take those contents and make new things and use them for research or education or other uses. Underpinning that is something called the Europeana Licensing Framework, which is a way of streamlining the very many different ways of licensing approaches that many different organizations have. We work with an organization called rightstatements.org. We're an integral part of that, to make sure that instead of having 3,500 different ways of approaching licensing, we have one common way of doing that. And we have 14 available right statements that organizations can apply to their data, from in copyright all the way to completely open and available for reuse. Underpinning all of that as well is something called the Europeana data model, which is a metadata model to bring together all the various ways that many different organizations, many different collection management systems, and other ways that people deal with their metadata. So this tries to map those ways to a centralized model so that these can be shared more readily on Europeana. And you'll find now some content management systems have that sort of mapping built into them. Metadata isn't my area of expertise, so I won't talk too much about that. We've also developed, amongst others, ways so that organizations can work together in a common way to understand their impact. So there is a document and a playbook called the Europeana Impact Playbook, which any of you could take and adopt the methods and ways of measuring impact from that. So what we hope through all of this is to become a site which is about trustworthy cultural heritage. So on Europeana collections and through the API of Europeana, you have authentic catalog information which comes directly from the source cultural heritage organization. We don't add or amend in any way the metadata information. You have a clear attribution to the creator and the rights information on every page of every object on Europeana collections. You can see the rights information. We have direct links from every page of every record on Europeana back to the Cultural Heritage Institute's website where that information is. And as I mentioned, we have a very visible license and rights statement on every item. So Europeana is, this is our website. The kind of thing that probably most people know for Europeana, as I mentioned earlier, it has about 50 million, more than 50 million records on there. They divide into images, text, audiovisual, sound, video, and some 3D material. The website's interface is available in multiple languages. It's in, I think, 28 languages, but the actual metadata content is in around 35 different languages. The breadth of material on Europeana is huge and varied. It's as varied as the concept of cultural heritage is itself. So from art and photography to newspapers, film, and many, many different ways of many different types of content. To that end, we, over the last few years, have started to try to divide this up a lot more so that we can help users find content more readily. So we have started doing something called collections, which are dividing up these 50 million records, which no one person would ever look at or probably have the time to look at, into different topics and themes. So they run from the First World War to archaeology, newspapers, maps and geography, migration, and many other different topics. The team that I work for are particularly about engaging people with collections. So we also not only present this sort of database information, but we also try to add context and add narrative and bring these together in an interesting way. So we do this through a number of different editorial formats. We have online exhibitions which cover many, many different topics, some very niche, some very broad. So for example, a very niche one is about the, not really niche in its scope, but niche in topic, is about the rise of literacy across Europe. And a very broad example is an exhibition we published earlier this year about celebrations and customs and traditions across Europe. And these are all available for free for anyone to access through our site. Most are in English, but there are some that are in other languages as well. We have galleries which bring together records and mostly images, mostly photography and paintings and so on specific topics. Very recently we published something about heroes of medicine, a gallery showing images and photographs and maybe paintings and so on of particular medical pioneers. We had something about Easter eggs and the different traditions of Easter eggs across Europe. All the way to masterpieces of Bulgarian art, for example. And to add even more context, we also have blogs which give a little bit more narrative-led discussion of a topic. So this screenshot's from a couple of weeks ago. So when the Eurovision Song Contest would have been happening, we published some blogs looking at the history of that. But we also published in the same week something about Napoleon. It's a very broad and interesting set of topics. And finally, for this section, I want to talk about some activities we do about participation. So most of what I've talked about so far is a sort of very one way from Europeana outwards, but we also organize events and activities around participation, some physical and some digitally. So we have events that are called collection days, where we invite members of the public to come to museums, galleries, libraries, archives, etc., to share their stories on specific topics, which are about, the first one we did was about World War I, and we've done some others which I'll come to in a moment. We also have a website called Transcribathon, where many of the materials that were shared in these previous campaigns are then transcribed by members of the public. So during our First World War campaign, we had many different postcards and letters and documents that were shared, and then these are in Transcribathon, these are transcribed. We do this through a site called Europeana Contribute, where people can share their documents, memories, photographs, and stories that relate to the specific topics that we look at. So I'll go a little bit more into detail of those. So our idea of having these seasons and thematic campaigns that we have is to get the right content to the right user at the right time. We do these through different campaigns of varying scope and duration, and they're designed to promote and highlight the high quality content that's in Europeana, as well as bring some new content to Europeana as well. We do this to work and engage European citizens, people all across Europe and even beyond Europe, and work with cultural heritage institutions across Europe to various different storytelling and participatory activities. I'm going to look at a few of these. Some I will go quite quickly through, and some I'll give a little bit more detail to. I'm conscious of my time. So the first one that we did was Europeana 1914 to 1918, and that was about the First World War. We've been running this actually for about 9 years now. This has grown into one of the world's biggest resources of World War I related material from 24 different countries in 15 different languages. It has both content from museums, galleries, libraries, archives, institutional content, but also many thousands of user-generated, of user-submitted stories from people all across Europe. So it's a very unique combination of personal stories and archival documents, public documents, and audiovisual material. Since 2018, we've had events, more than 200 different events in 24 different countries, and gathering in many documents relating to not necessarily individuals' experience of the First World War, but their ancestors, their families' experiences. Since 2018, we've worked on a project about migration. The idea here was to take the collection day model that we worked through in the First World War project and see if we could apply that to a more contemporary topic, which is migration. So we brought together collections that are on Europeana on the topic of migration, which sounds like a very sort of simple thing to say, but defining what a collection about migration is quite a difficult thing, because it could be the very obvious documentary evidence of migration, but it could also be the paintings of an artist who migrated several times in their lives, and is that about migration or not? We held a series of collection days events. So since 2018, we've had 23 different events in 12 different countries. More than 600 stories. I think it's actually more than 700 now. And more than 1,000 objects were digitized as a part of this. We have shared many blogs, galleries that highlight these stories, not just from the collection days, but also from archival material on Europeana, adding historical and cultural context, as well as an online exhibition looking at migration in very large terms, about how migration has impacted and changed the world. So these are an example of the various places in which we have held these events. And at these events, people share their personal objects. These are not all of them, but some of the people who have shared their objects. Some are very much their own stories, stories from now or from the last, within our lifetime, let's say. And some are stories from way back 200 years ago, from their families that moved from one place to another. And what we wanted to show was that migration wasn't something that was just happening now. This came about very much in the wake of a lot of newspaper, a lot of media coverage around migration, and a lot of public discourse. And we wanted to show that actually migration was something that has been happening in Europe for centuries. It's actually part of what makes us European in lots of ways. What we found when we did that was that people were very happy and wanted to share their stories about migration. I won't read every single thing in this now, but people were very happy to see that an organization such as Europeana, that cultural heritage organizations were taking an interest and were showing a sort of solidarity, if you like, to people who have experiences of migration. It made them think about themselves and their identities. It also sort of reinforced the power of cultural heritage and the value of cultural heritage, of being witnesses and being recording the things that have happened, which in some cases may not have been recorded before. We found, as I said, some of this, showing this as numbers is a little crass in a way, but 66% of people that we surveyed as taking part in this campaign had a more positive view of their identity. They were expressing higher levels of self-esteem and self-confidence. Some of our seasons are not really participatory, more editorially led. So our Women's History season is an example of that. It took place first in 2019, and then we repeated it again in March of this year. Pandemic notwithstanding, it sort of struck right in the middle of that. In that we shared exhibitions, blogs, galleries, telling the stories of women through history, specifically 38 individual women, but looking at women's history across several different centuries. To do that, we use the content that's in Europeana and showcase more than 400 different collection items from 110 different organizations in 23 different countries across the world. So it's a way of bringing together this content that probably is not really possible in a physical setting. We had this exhibition which looked at these 8 pioneering women from all across Europe. We have blogs and galleries. Most are written by us, me and my colleagues at Europeana, but we also work with partner organizations who can write guest blogs and galleries with us. From organizations like the Serbian National Library, who wrote about Serbia's first feminist author, to Fashion Pioneers, an organization we work with who work on fashion heritage. We also had a series, a professional series, looking at women who were involved in culture and technology, and did a lot of social media engagement as well, including Instagram, which I won't speak too much about right now. Last year, we did a season which was about participation and editorial called Europe at Work. It was about industrial heritage and working life. We had 14 different 14 different collection days across Europe, and still some ongoing even now. These give you a sort of a sense of the kind of things that people share. They bring stories, they share objects that relate to their working life. In fact, we had several that were about working in banking and finance. One that comes to mind is about someone who worked for the European Central Bank. So in that, 182 stories were shared, 304 objects were digitized. We worked with 24 different partners, and around 300 people attended these various events. We also made sure that we shared the story through editorial. So we had 32 different blogs and galleries on the topic of industrial heritage and working lives, again, written by us at Europeana or partners from across Europe. We had, as I said, 35 blogs and 20 galleries, 13 posts on a very professional focus for this, contributed by about 20 different cultural heritage institutions, and showcasing around 110 digitized cultural heritage objects. I think I don't have full time now to show this video. It's a sort of a 5-minute video that explains from our partners' perspective why they were involved and what they got from being involved. The presentation will be shared afterwards, so you can take a look at it from there. I'd like to quickly speak about one that we're starting later this year, which is a participation season about sport and about people's participation in sport that will begin later this year. So that will, as I mentioned, be very editorially led, but also having participation elements. We hope next year, all things being well with public health and everything, to be able to hold some collection day events in 2021. This was initially going to happen this summer, but things happened that stopped that. In particular, we wanted to do this in the year that the Olympics were happening and the European Men's Football Championships. But of course, they're all happening now next year. So we moved this into next year as well. To do this, we don't just work alone. We're very much an organization built around the idea of partnerships. Europeana as a concept is a partnership, but we also work in partnership with other organizations to bring our content beyond Europeana. So we have a partnership with an organization called Daily Art, which is an app and website where we feature art that is given. Daily Art is an app which sends a new painting to your phone each day, and we feature some of the material from Europeana through that. Each autumn, we have a competition called GIF It Up, where openly licensed material is animated and turned into GIFs by users all across the world. And that's a collaboration with organizations in the US, in New Zealand, Australia, and Giphy, which is a platform for animated GIFs, recently actually bought by Facebook. Our social media audiences are quite large. We have 115,000 Facebook followers. And for every editorial that we publish, we create a bespoke advertising campaign to bring that to audiences beyond Europeana. So to find the audiences for whatever that particular topic is. We have 36,000 Twitter followers, around 17.5 Pinterest followers, and our newsletter, which we send out monthly in English and French, has about 50,000 subscribers. So I hope in this whirlwind trip around Europeana, I've given you some ideas. We would love to work with organizations such as yours to help change the world and transform the world with culture. Very specifically, if you're interested in joining the Europeana Network Association, it's free to do so. You can go to this link and become a member. That will mean you'll receive communication from us and be involved more in what Europeana is doing. And so thank you. I would recommend, if you want to find out more about the kind of professional side of Europeana, to look at our website, which is called Europeana Pro, which looks at the issues that we work on, but from a professional angle. You can follow us on Twitter and, of course, connect to me on LinkedIn if you wish. So thank you very much. I hope that all went well and smoothly. And I think I now will try to hand over to Elena and Patricia, and I will stop sharing my screen, and hopefully you will start sharing yours.
you. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Elena?
Okay, yes, it's okay.
It's okay? Okay. Fine.
Good morning to everybody. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude to EABH for inviting us to participate in this webinar on finance and photography. It's a very interesting topic. We are going to talk about the archival processing and exploitation of the photographs collection of the Banco de España Historical Archive. In order to explain the scope of the project, we will give a little context on what Banco de España archive is. The archive of Banco de España is the archive of the Central Bank of Spain. It keeps the records generated by Banco de España from 1856 and its predecessors, Banco de San Carlos from 1782 and Banco de San Fernando from 1829. The archive of Banco de España is a first-rate source for research on economic and banking history. It occupies 27 linear kilometers of self. The Banco de España joined the use of photography at the same time that Spanish society did, since 1829 timidly and more intensely after 1850, when the wet collodion technique made possible a wider use of the photography. At the origin of the photography project is the fact that we knew very little about the photographs in the archive. We were aware of photographs exist and were scattered among the administrative files along the archive, especially the files of works on the buildings and files of employees. We also knew of the existence of some boxes full of photographs without any identification and without documents explaining to us what they represented. We did not know its quantity, dates, and contents. We did not know where they were, since there were no descriptions that allowed their location. And of course, they were in danger of deterioration and even subtraction due to lack of control. In this state of affairs, there was no way to count the photographs, so we made a first estimate of the volume scattered among the files and calculated a number of around 4,000 photographs. However, we did have a clear intuition of the wealth of the contents we had, and we could understand the photographic history of Banco de España was on these photographs. With all of this data, the bank decided for the implementation of a treatment and exploitation project for its photographic collection. The project was launched in 2015, lasted 3 years, ending in 2018. Throughout the project, we mainly carried out the following activities. We identified the series where photographs could be found. We searched, found, pointed, and counted the photographs that we were finding. We extracted the photographs from their files, kept them in specific conservation materials, and we installed them separately. Next, we created a factitious collection of photographs, but always maintaining the link with the files from which they came. We organized the collection in a logical way. We described the photographs intensively, following ISAG standard. And finally, we identified the authors of the photographs and generated a descriptive record for each of them, following ISAR CPF.
Okay, thank you, Elena. Hello to everybody. My name is Patricia, and it's my turn. Now that the project has finished, we know that the main contents of the collection are the buildings, the employees, and the institutional events of the bank. The chronology of the photographs, goes from 1869 till 2011, and the collection is composed by 20,400 photos, consisting mainly of positive prints on paper. The most common photographic process is a gelatin silver print, but we also have others like albumen, carbon, collodion, or gum dichromate. We have identified almost 600 photographers. Almost all of them are from Spain, but some of them also are from Morocco. We would like to highlight that before this project, Banco de España didn't have a photography collection. So we think it is a great achievement having now a collection with more than 20,000 photographs. All of them are fully identified, described, classified, and arranged in conservation conditions. And they are linked to the original files where they come from. So we have the textual information of the documents coming from the original files, and also the visual information of the photographs. The collection has revealed as a remarkable source of information. For example, the buildings of Banco de España give us information of the hundreds of premises that Banco de España had all around Spain since the 19th century. Some of them now have been disappeared or have been completely refurbished. The photographs of the employees give us information about the jobs in Banco de España, or the history of the photographic portrait along the 20th century, among other information, of course. And institutional events show us events in the decades of 1950s and 1970s, which have been almost unknown till now. In addition, the 600 photographers that have been identified help us to track the activity of local photographers throughout the country during this period of time. And the variety of photographic processes is useful to analyze the history of photography since the point of view of technology and the commercial trends. Regarding the exploitation and dissemination of the collection, we can say that we're happy to say that will be digitized. The collection, will be digitized next fall. We plan to start in September, and the whole set will be digitized before the end of the year. We will have a master's copy in a TIFF format, and also a disclosure copy in JPEG format, and we will use a Dublin Core metadata. After the digitalization, we plan to launch it online through our institutional repository, the institutional repository of Banco de España. We already have published a book at the end of 2019 on a paper version and also on a digital version. And the book was about the first photographs that were taken in Banco de España in Madrid before its opening in the 19th century. The photos were made by a very well-known photographer at that time in Spain called Laurent. And to conclude, with our collection of photographies, we expect to open up new perspectives for research by offering new materials. We expect also to draw attention of a more diverse profile of researchers, and hopefully we will increase the visibility of Banco de España archive and the wealth of its documentary fonts. And thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you also to EBHA. And thank you for your attention. We hope that this presentation has been useful and interesting for all of you. Thanks.